Hey everyone, what's up? This is Burns Outdoors, and we're going to do a third series on rod building. We're going to talk about doing your butt wrap. This is the decorative piece of your rod. So just remember that the more epoxy you put on your rod, the more you're going to change your action. That's something just to keep in mind in the back of your head. So on this rod that I'm building, I've actually already figured out where my guides are going to lay, what side of the rod they're going to lay on. I haven't placed them, but I've figured that out. I've figured out how long the grip and reel seat area is going to be, and then I've measured out what I'm going to do for my butt wrap. Okay, so layout's pretty simple. You find the spine and you find the belly, and you determine where you're going to put, what axis you're going to put your design on. If you wanted to sit on the top of the rod where you're looking down at it versus sitting on the bottom of the rod or on the sides. So you pick your starting point. So on the rods I build, I actually pick my starting point is always the top of the rod, because I want you to look down at the rod and I want you to see your wrap, the decorative wrap. I want you to be able to look at it while you're fishing. Not that anyone ever pays attention to it, but it's there. So I have already marked this rod, and how you mark it is you measure out the length that you want your wrap to be, which in this case is 4 inches, a little over, and then you measure to the center of that. On a rod that's tapered, depending on the length of the butt wrap that you're going to do, whether it's 4 inches, 6 inches, whatever, you're going to have to take into consideration the taper of your rod. Is it an extremely tapered, quickly tapers down to a point? Is it something that tapers slowly? You'll have to figure that out, and that'll only come in play if you do closed wraps, because as you close the wrap, you're going to have less blank the further down the rod you go versus the butt end of the rod. It's wider here than it is here. So there are books out there, there's some videos, not very many of them, that'll tell you how to figure each center. And I won't go into detail on that in this video. And if somebody wants that, or if you guys are interested in that, I can do that in the future. But what you'll do is you'll take, I usually just take a piece of tape, I run it in the center, and we'll just do it real quick right now. I run it in the center. All the way around the rod, real smooth, and make sure that ends line up with one another, so that, see how there's no overlap on either side, it's a real smooth transition. That's what you want. You want it so that it's a perfectly straight line. Okay, you can do, there's one or two methods that you can do. You can mark where your axis is, cut the tape. But what I tend to do is I just cut the tape. And in cutting the tape, you now know the circumference of the rod. And this is important because it's going to actually help you set up your centers. So what you do is you keep your piece of tape. I have a little ruler and a jig that I do this with, and I'll measure it out. I'll find my center, and that's my center. So let's say my center is going to be right about here. And I'll draw it out in big red marker. Center's right about there. Okay, so you can see that. Center's right about there. And that's important because the top of your rod, the one that you look at, centers are spaced differently than the back of your rod. Because as you wrap around the rod, you're going to make your centers even all the way around, you're going to have to space the top versus the bottom differently. So this is the top of the rod, my zero center. And you can see that that's the width of what I got for my first two marks. On the back side, when you do this, you'll measure half that width for the first and the last center that you're going to put on this rod. So what you'll see is this. Okay? And then you'll go full tape length, and then as you come to the end, you'll do half. Okay? And that'll keep you completely centered. When I do this, I'm marking it with a China marker right now so you can see it. But I do not, and you shouldn't either, use a China marker for marking your centers. Don't use a permanent marker, don't use anything that can be cleaned off by hand or by some sort of chemical. Because when you put your epoxy on or you put your color preserver on, it will come up and it's going to bleed into your thread and it's not going to look good. Do not do that. This is a bodkin. I take a bodkin and I lightly score it just enough so that I can see it. So that you can see it, I did do it white. Your first laydown, I'm going to wipe these off. Your first thread laydown is pretty important. Your first set, I should say, the initial layout of your wrap is the most important. You have a good layout, it's really hard. I say that, but I have messed up wraps. It's really hard to have a messed up wrap if you lay your threads out correctly from the get-go. And that's all about getting your centers right. That's all about, doing the right thread tension. And thread tension is really just a matter of feel. You want it tight, but you don't want it too tight that you cannot move the threads later on. You want to be able to shift things around a little bit. So I'm just going to show you what I'm doing, how I lay the thread down. What I've done is I've done masking tape on both ends, and you see how I have them spaced a little bit. That just gives me some places to put the tag ends of the thread. And then I take and wrap double-sided Scotch tape on either side. The reason I put the masking tape down is to keep the Scotch tape from really sticking to the rod. It becomes a real pain to get it off. I use rubbing alcohol to get off any adhesive type stuff like that, and it's just a pain. So to avoid that, if you put masking tape underneath your Scotch tape, it keeps you from having those issues. Masking tape comes off much better. Painter's tape works just as well. It just doesn't stick as well to it. So the wrap I'm doing is actually going to be what's called a star wrap. It's going to make a star at the end of it, just a 4-point star. Real simple, easy design. Takes a couple hours to do, and this is one of those ones that you have to do thread by thread when you're building a star. And again, if anyone's interested in learning how to do this in more detail, okay, sorry about that. The tape didn't stick to the tape very well. That's my fault. You gotta kind of press it down in there, even with the Scotch tape, because it will come off. It's thin, it's gonna have a lot of surface area to grab hold of. It's just kind of how it is. But you have to do this one, as I was saying. You have to kind of do it thread by thread to get the wrap right. Okay, so I wrap it around that extra tag end, and I just clip the tag. And the reason I clip the tag is it just keeps me from bumping it, and the more you touch the thread once it's laid, the harder it is to make sure it stays centered. So, and you can do this in, like I said, there's a bunch of different thread wraps you can do, and there's a bunch of people who've already figured all this stuff out. There's even programs out there now to help you design your thread wraps. So I think it's threadnet.com is one, and it's you can buy the software. It only works on Windows 7, so, or 97. It's an old software, so you kind of need an older computer or just have a different operating system. It's not a huge deal. They still sell that stuff, believe it or not, and it's a nice little program to have because you can see it all as you're trying to figure out what you're going to do. You can see the thread colors, you can pick thread colors, you can use a database of thread colors from different thread makers like Pro Wrap is one, and they get you pretty well going. So what I'm doing here is attempting to build a box with the thread on my centers. So as you build the box, that's my initial layout, and I have my points and my center line drawn on here, just kind of scored on here. And when I get done with this, what I'll do is I'll show you how I will move the threads. And before I move the threads on my initial layout, I always lay down another piece of tape, because the oils from your skin will mess up the adhesiveness on this Scotch tape. So you kind of have to help secure things down. You'll put another layer of tape down. So try to also, that's another tip, just don't touch your tape as much as you can help it. Anyway, just don't touch the tape as much as you can help it. It takes some time, as you can see. Sometimes I have a little difficulty with my thread. I probably could have cut these a little longer. I didn't. You know, if you cut them a little longer, you get a little bit more to play with towards the end. Gives you a little bit more little bit better control, a little bit more control. Alright, so real quick, that's the initial layout of a star. You can see that they're not perfect yet, and it's because I haven't moved them around, and I'll use my bodkin here in just a second to move them around to get them right where I want them. And that's my initial layout. You don't touch them. You try not to move them around as much as you can. Again, there's always going to be play in these, so you don't put them so tight that you cannot move them around. Okay? And the bigger the box, the bigger the star. So keep that in mind as well, because that means more threads, and that means more piece by piece. So if you want a really big thread, or you got a really big rod blank, maybe consider doing a different style of wrap, or maybe instead of doing stars or doing a single wrap, do what's called a double wrap, and you double your patterns. So you'll see how, and I'll show you what I mean by doubling your wraps. And that's a whole nother ball game in and of itself. It's just a lot of keeping count of your threads. Okay, so that's about where I want it. About the same size. I try to make sure it's all eyeball on this when I get to this point. Kind of eyeball size of the squares, and again, you can adjust them as you get going. It's not that huge of a deal. It's a pretty simple process. And this is actually top side of the rod. So these are the ones that you will see more consistently. So it's kind of it's sad in a way. You could build a perfectly laid out rod. You can make it look, and do a whole bunch of, it could be the lightest rod on the market. It could be the most accurate casting rod just because of the way you set up your guides. It could be, everything could be perfectly built. It could be the most practical rod on the market. You do really bad on your thread work though, everyone's going to look at you and be like, what is that? So take your time. If it doesn't look right, then it's probably not right, and you need to redo it so that it looks good. You're going to be proud of the rod afterwards in that place. So this isn't something that goes quickly. This is a slow process. As you can see, and I will probably end up adjusting these after I do my second set of threads. I always do. It's just you're constantly trying to make sure everything fits in there correctly. So there you go. That's your initial layout of your rod. You'll see there'll be 4 stars on top, there'll be 3 on the bottom. And here's what I mean by doing a double wrap. So I have 4 on top, 3 on bottom, and I can actually, if I had drawn these accesses out, this side one here and this side one here, I can do another mirror image of a star at every one of these points so that you'd see it on the sides as well. And you can do it, you can break it up because the rod is 360 degrees. You can break it up every 90 degrees. You can break it up every 30. It's just how much you want to keep track of, how wide that rod blanket, how big that rod blank is. You can get over cluttered. So keep that in mind. So if you want me to do future videos like this where I go all the way through and show you how to do step-by-step different wraps, like St. John's Cross, stars, whatever, chevrons, diamonds, fades, that's fine. Just like and subscribe. I'd enjoy doing that. I would enjoy making the videos for you. I just got to know if that's what you want, because there are some out there. Some are better than others. Anyway, just to recap, before you set up your wrap, you want to make sure you know exactly where your reel seat, your grip, and your guides are going to be. And with guides, it's just whether it's on the spine or on the belly of the rod. You want to mark out your centers, and you want to do that by measuring the center of where you plan on doing your wrap and then spacing it out accordingly. When you go to lay your threads down, if you're going to do the method that I use with the Scotch tape, make sure you lay a layer of masking tape down prior to putting your Scotch tape on top, because it'll make it a lot easier for you to get it done and pulled off once it is done. And then also cut your threads a little bit longer. Thread tension's important. Make sure it's tight, but it's not so tight you cannot move the centers if you need to. You're going to have to adjust these as you go along. So as you can see, this one's going to be needed to be adjusted, probably closer to this side when I sit down and finish this. That's basic overview. Like, subscribe. Thanks for watching the video. Have a good one, guys.